Sarah Mitchell, a 58-year-old widow, has lost everything that once defined her life. After her husband's sudden death 2 years ago, her adult children have grown distant, her small bakery business has failed, and mounting debts threaten to take her home. Standing on a bridge one rainy evening, ready to give up entirely, she encounters Nathan Crow Feather, a 35-year-old Apache construction foreman whose imposing 618 frame hides a gentle soul, marked by his own losses. What begins as Nathan preventing Sarah from making the ultimate mistake evolves into an unlikely friendship that will teach both of them that resilience isn't about avoiding pain. It's about finding the strength to rebuild from the ashes of what was lost. Through Apache wisdom passed down from Nathan's grandmother and Sarah's rediscovered inner strength, they'll learn that sometimes our greatest breakdowns become the foundation for our most beautiful breakthroughs. The rain pelted Sarah Mitchell's face like tiny, cold accusations as she stood on the riverside bridge, her trembling hands gripping the wet metal railing. At 58, she felt ancient, not in years but in the weight of accumulated losses that seemed to crush her spirit a little more each day. "This is it," she whispered to the churning river below, her voice barely audible above the storm. "There's nothing left. 2 years, that's how long it had been since David's heart attack had stolen her husband, her best friend, and her anchor in this world. 2 years since the medical bills had started piling up like autumn leaves, suffocating everything in their path. 2 years since her children, her own flesh and blood, had slowly drifted away, too busy with their own lives to notice their mother drowning in grief and debt. The wind whipped her graying brown hair across her face as she closed her eyes, remembering the morning she'd received the final notice. Her little bakery, Sweet Dreams Pastries, the place where she'd poured her heart for 15 years, would be closed by the bank in 30 days. The same bakery where she and David had shared their first dance to the radio after closing, where she'd taught her daughter Emma how to braid challah bread, where her son Michael had proposed to his girlfriend behind the counter on a snowy December evening. "All gone," she sobbed, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. "Everything's gone." Sarah had always been the strong one, the one everyone came to for comfort, for advice, for her famous chocolate chip cookies and a listening ear. But who was there for her now? Emma lived 3 states away, calling only on holidays with hurried conversations about her demanding job at the law firm. Michael had moved to California after his divorce, and their weekly calls had dwindled to monthly check-ins, filled with uncomfortable silences. The water below looked almost peaceful in the darkness, promising an end to the constant ache in her chest, the sleepless nights, the overwhelming fear of tomorrow. She'd lost her savings, her business, and soon her house, the same house where she and David had brought their babies home, where they'd celebrated 32 anniversaries, where his clothes still hung in the closet because she couldn't bear to give them away. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, lifting one foot toward the railing's lower bar. "David, I'm so sorry. I tried, but I can't." "Ma'am?" The deep, gentle voice cut through the storm like a warm blanket, startling Sarah so much she nearly lost her balance. She turned to see a massive figure approaching through the rain, a man so tall he seemed to block out the streetlight behind him. But something in his tone, despite his imposing size, made her pause rather than flee. "Are you okay?" the man asked, stopping about 10 feet away. Even in the dim light, Sarah could see he was Native American, with long black hair pulled back and kind eyes that seemed to see straight through her pain. He wore work clothes, jeans, boots, and a flannel shirt, and despite his giant frame, he moved with surprising gentleness. "I'm fine," Sarah lied, wiping her eyes roughly. Just getting some air." The man nodded slowly, then did something unexpected. Instead of leaving or trying to talk her down, he simply walked to the opposite side of the bridge and leaned against the railing, gazing out at the water. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of rain and rushing water. "My grandmother used to say that rivers carry away what we can't hold on to," he said finally, his voice barely above the storm. but they also bring new things down. Depends on whether you're looking at what's leaving or what's coming. Sarah stared at him, this strange giant of a man who'd appeared like some kind of guardian in the night. "What would you know about it?" she asked, the words coming out harsher than she intended. He turned to face her then, and even in the darkness she could see the depth of old pain in his eyes. "I know what it feels like to stand on a bridge in the rain, wondering if the water might be kinder than tomorrow." Something in his tone, a recognition, a shared understanding, made Sarah's defenses crumble. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks as she gripped the railing tighter. "I've lost everything," she whispered. "My husband died 2 years ago. My business is failing. My children, they've moved on with their lives, and I don't blame them. I'm losing my house. My savings are gone, and I wake up every morning wondering what the point is." "What's the point of any of it?" The man was quiet for a long moment, then spoke with careful deliberation. "My name is Nathan Crowfeather. I'm 35 years old, and 5 years ago, I lost my wife and my 2 little girls in a car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light while they were coming home from dance class." Sarah's breath caught. Here was this strong, vital man, and he carried a loss that made her own seem almost bearable by comparison. "I stood on this same bridge 3 years ago," Nathan continued, his voice steady but filled with old grief. "Had the whole thing planned out, but my grandmother, she's been gone 10 years now. I swear I heard her voice in the wind that night. She told me something I want to share with you, if you'll listen." Sarah found herself nodding, captivated by this unexpected encounter, this man who seemed to understand the particular weight of overwhelming loss. She said that when we lose everything we thought made us who we are, we have a choice. We can let the loss define us, make us smaller, convince us we're nothing without what we've lost. Or, he paused, looking directly at her, we can let the breaking open be the beginning of something we never could have imagined when we were whole. "That sounds like something people say when they haven't really lost everything," Sarah said, but without the bitterness she'd felt moments before. Nathan smiled sadly. "Maybe, but here's what I know for sure. 3 years ago, I was a broken man ready to follow my family into whatever comes next. Tonight, I'm the construction foreman on the new community center downtown, and yesterday I helped Mrs. Garcia from my neighborhood fix her porch steps. Last week I taught my buddy's son how to change a tire. Small things, maybe, but they matter." He stepped closer, his presence somehow both protective and non-threatening. "I'm not saying the pain goes away. I still talk to my girls every night before I go to sleep. I still reach for my wife's hand when I'm falling asleep. But I also know that if I'd stepped off this bridge that night, Mrs. Garcia would still have broken steps, and Tommy wouldn't know how to change a tire, and maybe someone else would be standing here tonight with no one to remind them that rivers bring new things downstream." Sarah felt something shift inside her, not hope, exactly, but a tiny crack in the wall of despair she'd built around herself. "I don't know how to start over," she admitted. "I'm 58 years old. I've never lived alone. I don't know who I am without David, without my bakery, without being needed." "That's okay," Nathan said gently. "You don't have to know tonight. You just have to be willing to find out tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that." The rain began to soften, and Sarah realized she was no longer shivering, whether from cold or fear she couldn't say. This enormous man with the gentle voice had somehow anchored her to the present moment, to the possibility that tomorrow might hold something other than more loss. "My grandmother taught me that resilience isn't about being strong enough to never break," Nathan continued. "It's about being wise enough to know that breaking isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the end of the first chapter." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just a man who'd survived his own devastation, but someone who'd found a way to transform that survival into service to others. "Why are you here tonight?" she asked. "On this bridge, I mean." Nathan glanced down at his boots, then back at her. "I work late sometimes when I can't sleep. Was heading home when I saw you. Something about the way you were standing. He shrugged. Maybe my grandmother sent me. Maybe it was just chance. Does it matter? Sarah considered this, feeling the fight drain out of her for the first time in months. Not the fight to live that felt different now, but the fight against accepting help, against believing that someone might actually care what happened to her. I don't even know where to start, she said quietly. How about with getting out of this rain? Nathan suggested with a small smile. There's a diner about 6 blocks from here that stays open all night. Makes decent coffee and pie. Not as good as a bakery owner probably makes, but decent. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Sarah almost smiled. How did you know I was a bakery owner? Your hands, Nathan said simply. My wife was a teacher, had the same kind of hands, gentle but strong, used to creating things, nurturing things. Bakers have hands like that too. Sarah looked down at her hands, seeing them as if for the first time in years. They were weathered now with new lines and spots that spoke of grief and hardship. But Nathan was right. They were still the hands that had shaped thousands of loaves of bread, decorated countless birthday cakes, and comforted her children through scraped knees and broken hearts. I make really good chocolate chip cookies, she said softly, the words feeling strange after so long. I bet you do, Nathan replied. Maybe someday you'll make some again. As they walked slowly away from the bridge, Sarah felt the strangest sensation. Not happiness, not hope exactly, but something she couldn't quite name. A sense that this enormous man with the kind eyes and the gentle voice had just handed her something precious. The possibility that her story wasn't over yet. Behind them, the river continued its ancient flow, carrying away what could no longer be held, making space for whatever might come downstream tomorrow. The Moonlight Diner sat like a beacon in the darkness, its neon sign flickering intermittently, but casting enough warm light to make Sarah feel safer than she had in months. Nathan held the door open for her, and she was struck again by his sheer size. He had to duck slightly to avoid hitting his head on the doorframe. Inside, the diner was exactly what she'd expected. Worn vinyl booths, checkered linoleum floors, and the comforting smell of coffee and bacon grease. A tired-looking waitress with kind eyes and graying hair looked up from wiping down the counter. Nathan, she called out with genuine warmth. Honey, you're out late tonight. Everything okay? Hey, Dolores, this is Sarah. We're going to grab some coffee and pie if that's all right. Dolores studied Sarah with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent decades serving people at their lowest points. Of course, sweetheart. You'll take that corner booth. I'll bring coffee right over. As they settled into the cracked leather seats, Sarah felt the surreal nature of the evening settling over her. 3 hours ago, she'd been ready to end everything. Now she was sitting across from a stranger, this gentle giant who'd somehow pulled her back from the brink without even trying. You come here often? She asked, noting how comfortable Nathan seemed, how the waitress knew his name. Few times a week, Nathan admitted, wrapping his large hands around the coffee mug Dolores had silently placed in front of him. When sleep doesn't come easy, I drive around and up here more often than not. Dolores has heard more of my story than most people. Sarah sipped her coffee, surprisingly good for a late-night diner, and studied Nathan's face in the fluorescent light. His features were strong and weathered, with laugh lines around his eyes that spoke of better times. But there was something else there too, a depth that came from having walked through fire and somehow found his way to the other side. Tell me about your family, she said softly. If you don't mind. Nathan's expression grew distant, but not closed off. Maria was a second-grade teacher, had this laugh that could light up a whole room. We met at a powwow when I was 25. She was there with some friends, and I was dancing with my uncle's group. She said later that she fell in love with the way I moved, like I was talking to the earth with my feet. He paused, lost in the memory. Our girls, Lily and Rose, they were 6 and 4 when they died. Lily had Maria's laugh and wanted to be a teacher, just like her mama. Rose was quiet like me, but she could draw anything. Horses, birds, people. Used to leave little pictures under my pillow for me to find when I got home from work. Sarah felt tears pricking her eyes. They sound beautiful. Nathan's voice was steady, but she could see the effort it took. The day they died, Maria had taken them to Rosie's first dance class. Lily was so excited to watch her little sister learn ballet. They were 5 minutes from home when it happened. The other driver walked away without a scratch. "Nathan, I'm so sorry." The words felt inadequate, but Sarah meant them with every fiber of her being. "Thank you." He met her eyes. "It's taken me a long time to be able to talk about them without falling apart completely. My grandmother always said that when we speak the names of those we've lost with love instead of just grief, we keep them alive in a different way." Dolores appeared with 2 slices of apple pie, setting them down with practiced quiet. Sarah realized she hadn't eaten anything substantial in days, but somehow the pie looked appealing for the first time in weeks. "Your grandmother sounds like she was a wise woman," Sarah said, taking a small bite. The pie was better than she'd expected, not as good as what she used to make, but made with care. "Elena Crow Feather. She raised me after my parents died in a mining accident when I was 8. Nathan smiled, the first genuinely happy expression Sarah had seen from him. She was this tiny woman, barely 5 feet tall, but she could command a room full of grown men with just a look. "Taught me everything that mattered, how to work with my hands, how to listen to people, how to find strength in tradition. Is she the one who taught you about resilience?" Nathan nodded, his expression growing thoughtful. "Among other things, she used to say that white culture teaches people to avoid pain, to medicate it or ignore it or pretend it doesn't exist. But Apache wisdom teaches something different, that pain is information, that suffering can be a teacher if we're willing to listen." Sarah set down her fork, intrigued despite herself. "What do you mean?" "Well, think about it this way," Nathan said, leaning forward slightly. "When you burn your hand on a stove, the pain teaches you not to touch hot stoves. But emotional pain, loss, grief, disappointment, that teaches us too, if we let it. It teaches us what matters, what we can survive, what we're capable of." "I don't feel like I'm learning anything," Sarah said quietly. "I just feel broken." "That's because you're still in the middle of it," Nathan replied gently. "My grandmother used to tell a story about a man who found a cocoon hanging from a tree branch. He watched it for days, fascinated, until he saw the butterfly struggling to break free. The man felt sorry for the butterfly and used a knife to carefully cut open the cocoon to help it escape." Sarah waited, sensing there was more. "The butterfly fell to the ground," Nathan continued. "Its wings were too weak to fly. The man didn't understand that the struggle to break free was what made the butterfly's wings strong enough to carry it. By trying to help, he had doomed it." "Are you saying I should be grateful for all this pain?" "No," Nathan said firmly. "I'm saying that the struggle you're going through right now, losing David, losing your business, feeling abandoned by your children, all of that is building something in you that you can't see yet. Strength you didn't know you had. Wisdom you couldn't gain any other way." Sarah considered this, rolling the idea around in her mind like a stone she wasn't sure she wanted to pick up. "It doesn't feel like strength. It feels like I'm disappearing." "Maybe the person you were before is disappearing," Nathan suggested. "But that doesn't mean you are. Maybe you're just making room for who you're becoming." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the late-night diner providing a cocoon of warmth and safety around them. Outside, the rain had stopped, and Sarah could see stars beginning to peek through the breaking clouds. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course. How do you do it? How do you get up every morning knowing they're gone? How do you find reasons to care about things like Mrs. Garcia's porch steps when the people you loved most in the world are never coming home?" Nathan was quiet for a long time, and Sarah worried she'd pushed too far, asked something too personal, but when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than hurt. "The first year, I didn't," he admitted. "I went through the motions of living, but I wasn't really alive. I was angry at God, angry at the drunk driver, angry at Maria for taking the girls to dance class that day, angry at myself for not being there to protect them. The anger was eating me alive." He paused, gathering his thoughts. It was my grandmother's voice I heard on the bridge that night, 3 years ago. She reminded me of something she'd taught me when I was young, that we have a choice about what we do with our pain. We can let it make us bitter, let it convince us that the world is a cruel place where love always ends in loss. Or we can let it make us more compassionate, more aware of how precious every moment is. That sounds impossible, Sarah whispered. It did to me too, Nathan said. But then I started small, really small. The first thing I did was plant a garden in my backyard, just a small patch of tomatoes and peppers and herbs. Maria had always wanted a garden, but we'd never gotten around to it. Every morning I'd go out and water those plants and pull weeds, and for those few minutes I felt connected to something larger than my grief. Sarah found herself leaning forward, captivated by his story. Then Miss Garcia mentioned her steps were loose, and instead of just nodding and changing the subject, I offered to fix them. It took me an entire Saturday, but when I was done and saw how happy it made her, how safe she felt coming and going from her house, I felt something I hadn't felt since the accident. I felt useful again, needed. And that helped. It was a beginning, Nathan said carefully. It didn't fix everything. I still have days when the grief hits me like a freight train. I still dream about them, still wake up sometimes reaching for Maria or listening for the girls' voices. But I also know now that I can carry their love forward in how I treat other people, how I show up in the world. Sarah felt something stirring in her chest, not hope exactly, but curiosity. What would your grandmother say about my situation? Nathan smiled, and Sarah could see him channeling the wisdom of the woman who'd raised him. She'd probably ask you what you're most afraid of losing next. The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. Everything else, she said without hesitation. My house, my independence, my dignity, having to ask my children for help, ending up in some nursing home where nobody knows that I once ran a successful business or made the best wedding cakes in 3 counties. And what are you most afraid of gaining? Sarah blinked, confused. What do you mean? If you rebuild, if you start over, what scares you about that possibility? Sarah thought for a moment, surprised by the question. That I might fail again, that I might open my heart to new people, new dreams, and lose those too. That I might discover I'm not as strong or capable as I always thought I was. Nathan nodded as if this was exactly the answer he'd expected. My grandmother would say that those fears are the map to your healing. Everything you're afraid of losing, everything you're afraid of gaining, those are the places where your old life is fighting against your new one. I don't understand. The woman who built that bakery, who raised those children, who loved David for 32 years, she was strong and capable and brave, but maybe she was also afraid of taking risks, afraid of failing, afraid of being vulnerable. Maybe losing everything is forcing you to discover parts of yourself that woman never had to access. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, partly fear and partly recognition. What if I don't like who I discover? What if you do? Nathan countered gently. What if you find out you're braver than you thought, more resilient than you imagined? What if you discover that your capacity to love and create and contribute wasn't tied to any of the things you lost? Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern sky. Sarah realized they'd been talking for hours, and for the first time in months, she hadn't thought about David's absence, or her mounting bills, or her children's distance. She'd been fully present, engaged in the kind of deep conversation she hadn't had since David died. I should get home, she said reluctantly, not really wanting to leave this warm cocoon of understanding. Where's home? Nathan asked. For now, the house David and I bought when the kids were small, but probably not for much longer. She felt the familiar weight of her circumstances settling back onto her shoulders. Would you like me to drive you? I can come back for your car tomorrow if you'd like. Sarah looked at this kind giant who'd pulled her back from the edge and spent the entire night helping her remember that she was still a person worth saving. Why are you doing this? Why do you care what happens to someone you just met? Nathan was quiet for a moment, then spoke with simple honesty. Because 3 years ago, I needed someone to care what happened to me, and no one was there. Because helping you reminds me that Maria and the girls would be proud of the man I am trying to become. And because my grandmother always said that we heal our own wounds by binding up the wounds of others. As they walked out of the diner and into the cool pre-dawn air, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years. The sense that she wasn't completely alone in the world. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. No clear vision of how to rebuild her life from the ruins of everything she'd lost. But for the first time since David died, tomorrow felt like a possibility rather than a threat. 2 weeks had passed since the night on the bridge, and Sarah found herself thinking about Nathan Crow-Feather at the strangest moments. While sorting through medical bills she couldn't pay, while staring at the eviction notice taped to her front door, while lying awake at 3 in the morning listening to the house settle around her in all these moments of despair, she heard his voice. Rivers bring new things downstream. She hadn't seen him since that night at the diner, though she'd driven past the construction site where he'd mentioned working several times, never quite brave enough to stop. What would she say? Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for reminding me I'm human. Thank you for seeing something in me that I can't see in myself. This morning, however, the choice was taken away from her. She was sitting at her kitchen table, coffee growing cold as she stared at a pile of final notices, when someone knocked on her front door. Through the peephole she saw Nathan's unmistakable silhouette, and her heart began to race. Not with fear, but with something she couldn't quite name. "Nathan," she said, opening the door. He looked exactly as she remembered, enormous but gentle, wearing work clothes and carrying what appeared to be a toolbox. "Hi, Sarah. I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I was in the neighborhood and thought." He paused, looking uncertain for the first time since she'd known him. "Actually, that's not true. I wasn't in the neighborhood. I came here on purpose." Despite everything, Sarah almost smiled. "Why?" "Because I've been thinking about what you said that night, about your bakery, about losing your home, and I have an idea, if you're willing to listen." Sarah's defenses went up immediately. She'd spent the last 2 weeks remembering Nathan as some kind of guardian angel, but now the practical voice in her head reminded her that she barely knew this man. What kind of idea? The kind that might sound crazy at first. Nathan admitted. "Can I come in? I promise I'm not here to take advantage of you, or sell you something or make your problems worse. I think I might know a way to help." Something in his tone, earnest, almost vulnerable, made Sarah step back and gesture him inside. Her house felt smaller with him in it, but not uncomfortably so. If anything, his presence made the space feel less empty than it had in months. "Coffee?" she offered, falling back on the hospitality that had been bred into her bones. "That would be great, thank you." As she poured 2 cups, Sarah was acutely aware of how the house must look to him. The stack of bills on the table, the dust on surfaces she'd stopped caring about cleaning, the general air of a life slowly falling apart. But when she glanced at Nathan, he wasn't looking at any of that. He was studying a framed photo on the mantel, her and David on their last anniversary, both of them laughing at something he'd said during dinner. "You look happy there," he said softly. Sarah handed him the coffee, noticing how the mug looked almost comically small in his massive hands. "That was taken 6 months before he died. We had no idea how little time we had left." "Do you think that would have changed anything? If you'd known?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "I don't know. Maybe we would have traveled more, or said I love you more often. Maybe we would have been too scared to enjoy anything, knowing it was going to end." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "My grandmother used to say that every morning is a gift we didn't earn, and can't keep forever. The trick is unwrapping it with gratitude, instead of fear." "Is that what you wanted to talk to me about? Your grandmother's wisdom?" "Partly." Nathan set down his coffee and looked directly at her. But mostly I wanted to talk to you about the community center we're building downtown, the one I mentioned that night. Sarah frowned, unsure where this was leading. Okay, it's going to be a place for people who are rebuilding their lives, addiction recovery, job training, seniors programs, childcare for single parents. The city council approved the construction, but they're still figuring out what programs to offer and who's going to run them. That sounds wonderful, but I don't see what it has to do with me. Nathan leaned forward slightly, his expression growing more animated. There's a commercial kitchen in the plans. State-of-the-art, designed to handle everything from cooking classes to catering for events. They need someone to run it, someone with experience, someone who understands food service, someone who could develop programs that would actually help people. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Nathan, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I lost my bakery because I couldn't manage the business side of things. I'm not qualified to run anything, especially not something that important. You lost your bakery because you were grieving and overwhelmed and trying to handle everything alone, Nathan said firmly. That doesn't mean you don't know how to bake or teach or create something beautiful out of basic ingredients. Even if that were true, I can't afford to take on any new projects. I'm about to lose my house. I need to find a job that pays actual money, not chase some pipe dream about helping people. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, then reached into his toolbox and pulled out a manila folder. What if I told you it could be both? Sarah opened the folder and found herself looking at an official job posting. Culinary Program Director, Riverside Community Center. Salary range $45,000 to $55,000 annually, plus benefits and housing allowance. She looked up at Nathan in shock. Housing allowance? There's a small apartment above the community center kitchen, part of the compensation package. It's not much. 1-bedroom basic furnishings, but it's yours if you want the job. Sarah's hands began to shake as she read through the job description. Develop and implement culinary education programs. Manage commercial kitchen operations. Provide job training and life skills, education. Coordinate with local organizations to serve community meals. This is everything I used to love about my bakery, she whispered. Teaching people, feeding people, being part of something bigger than myself. I know, Nathan said gently. I wrote the job description with you in mind. Sarah looked up sharply. You what? I sit on the community center board. Volunteer position. They needed someone with construction experience to oversee the building process. When they started talking about hiring someone to run the culinary program, I couldn't stop thinking about what you'd said that night. About being good at making people feel welcome, about missing the connections you used to have with your customers. Nathan, I can't let you create a job just for me. That's not right. I didn't create it, he said firmly. The position was always part of the plan. But when they asked me what kind of person they should look for, I thought about the woman who built a successful bakery from nothing, who raised children while running a business, who cared so much about her customers that losing her connection to them felt like losing part of her identity. Sarah felt tears threatening again, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of despair. What if I'm not that person anymore? What if grief has broken something in me that can't be fixed? Nathan's expression softened. Can I show you something? He reached into his toolbox again and pulled out what looked like a ceramic bowl, but as he handed it to her, Sarah could see that it was cracked. Not broken, exactly, but clearly damaged and then repaired with what appeared to be gold. This is called kintsugi, Nathan explained. It's a Japanese art form, but the philosophy behind it reminds me of something my grandmother used to teach. When pottery breaks, instead of throwing it away or trying to hide the damage, you repair it with gold. The idea is that the breaking and healing are part of the object's history, not something to be ashamed of. Sarah ran her fingers along the golden lines, marveling at how the repairs had somehow made the bowl more beautiful than it probably was originally. It's gorgeous. That's how I think about what happened to me after Maria and the girls died, Nathan said quietly. The breaking nearly destroyed me, but the healing, the slow, difficult work of putting myself back together, that's made me into someone I couldn't have been before. Someone who notices when a woman is standing on a bridge in the rain. Someone who knows how to sit with people in their pain without trying to fix it right away. You think I could be like this bowl, broken but repaired? I think you already are, Nathan said simply. I think the woman sitting across from me right now has a depth of compassion and understanding that could come from having lost everything and survived it. I think the people who come to that community center kitchen are going to need someone who knows what it feels like to start over, not someone who's never experienced real loss. Sarah set the bowl carefully on the table, afraid she might drop it with her trembling hand. When would they need an answer? The position starts in 6 weeks, when construction is finished. You could start planning the programs now, get familiar with the equipment, meet with some of the other program directors to coordinate services. 6 weeks. Sarah's mind was racing. In 6 weeks, she would officially lose her house. The timing was either incredibly fortunate or cosmically orchestrated. There's something else, Nathan said, his voice taking on a slightly different tone. The board would like you to cater the grand opening celebration. It would be your first official event, a chance to showcase what the program could offer. They're expecting about 200 people, local officials, community leaders, families who'll be using the center. Sarah felt a familiar flutter in her stomach, the same feeling she used to get when a customer ordered a particularly challenging wedding cake. It was part terror, part excitement, the thrill of rising to meet a creative challenge. 200 people, she repeated. You don't have to decide today, Nathan said quickly. Take whatever time you need. But Sarah, I want you to know, this isn't charity. This isn't me or the board feeling sorry for you. This is us recognizing that you have exactly the skills and experience we need, and we'd be lucky to have you. After Nathan left, Sarah sat alone in her kitchen for a long time, staring at the kintsugi bowl and the job description. Outside, spring was tentatively asserting itself. She could see the first green shoots pushing up through the soil in the flower bed David had planted for her years ago. She'd assumed those bulbs were dead, having ignored them through 2 seasons of grief. But there they were, growing anyway. She thought about what Nathan had said about his grandmother's garden, how tending to something small and growing had been the first step back from the brink of despair. She thought about Mrs. Garcia's porch steps, about how good it had felt to Nathan to be useful again, to feel needed. When was the last time she'd felt truly needed? Before she could lose her nerve, Sarah picked up her phone and dialed her daughter's number. Emma answered on the 3rd ring, sounding harried and distracted. Mum, is everything okay? It's the middle of the day. I'm fine, sweetheart. I wanted to tell you about something that's happened. A job opportunity. A job? Emma's tone sharpened with interest. Mum, that's great. What kind of job? As Sarah described the community center position, she heard something in her daughter's voice that she hadn't heard in months. Pride. Not pity, not worry, but actual pride in her mother. Mum, that sounds perfect for you, Emma said when Sarah finished. You always said the best part of the bakery was getting to be part of people's celebrations, helping them create memories. This sounds like that, but bigger. You don't think I'm too old to start over? Emma was quiet for a moment. Mum, do you remember what you used to tell me when I was little and afraid to try something new? Sarah smiled, remembering. That brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the important thing even when you are scared. Exactly. This sounds like an important thing, Mum. And if anyone can do it, it's the woman who built Sweet Dreams from nothing and made it the heart of our community. After they hung up, Sarah called Michael in California. His response was even more enthusiastic than Emma's, and before the conversation was over, he was already talking about flying out for the grand opening celebration. I'm proud of you, Mum, he said before they hung up. Dad would be proud too. You know he would. As the sun began to set, Sarah found herself standing in her backyard, looking at the neglected garden beds. Tomorrow she would call Nathan and accept the position. Tomorrow she would start planning menus and programs and thinking about how to transform a commercial kitchen into a place where people could rebuild their lives one meal at a time. But tonight she walked to the small shed behind her house and found David's gardening tools, covered in dust but still functional. If she was going to start over, if she was going to let the broken places in her life be repaired with gold, she might as well start with something small and grow it. Something that proved life could emerge from ground that had seemed barren and hopeless just moments before. As she knelt in the cool earth and began to pull weeds from around the emerging green shoots, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since David's death. The sense that tomorrow held promise rather than just more survival. The bulbs had been there all along, waiting through the dark winter for the right conditions to grow again. Maybe she had been too. 6 weeks later, Sarah stood in the gleaming community center kitchen at 5:30 in the morning, surrounded by the controlled chaos she'd missed more than breathing. Steam rose from industrial-sized stockpots, the scent of fresh herbs filled the air, and the rhythmic sound of chopping knives created a percussion that made her heart sing for the first time in years. The grand opening was today, and she was preparing to feed 200 people, city officials, community leaders, families and volunteers who would make this center a living, breathing part of Riverside's heart. But more than that, she was proving to herself that the woman who had built Sweet Dreams Pastries hadn't died with David. She had simply been sleeping, waiting for the right moment to emerge from her cocoon of grief. Behind you, Hot, called Maria Santos, one of the 3 community members Sarah had hired as her first kitchen assistants. Maria was a 42-year-old single mother who'd been laid off from her factory job 6 months ago. She moved through the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who'd been cooking for large families her entire life. "How are we doing on the roasted vegetables?" Sarah called out, checking items off her master list. Organization had always been her strength, the ability to coordinate dozens of moving pieces into a harmonious whole. 20 minutes out, replied James Wheeler, a soft-spoken man in his 50s who'd been unemployed for over a year after the plant closure. Sarah had discovered that beneath his quiet demeanor lay an intuitive understanding of flavors and timing that reminded her of herself at his age. The third member of her team was unexpected. Tommy Garcia, the 17-year-old grandson of Nathan's neighbor, Mrs. Garcia. He'd started hanging around the kitchen during setup, initially just curious, but Sarah had quickly recognized his natural talent and eagerness to learn. Today marked his first official day as a paid kitchen assistant. "Miss Sarah," Tommy called out, his voice crackling with adolescent nervousness. "The salad stations are ready, and I set up the dessert display like you showed me." "Perfect, Tommy. You're a natural at this." The boy beamed, and Sarah felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest. This was what she'd missed most, not just the cooking, but the mentoring, the sense of being part of something larger than herself, the joy of watching people discover capabilities they didn't know they had. A gentle knock on the kitchen service door interrupted her thought. Through the window she could see Nathan's unmistakable silhouette, and her pulse quickened in a way that surprised her. Over the past 6 weeks, he'd become a constant presence in her life, helping her move into the apartment upstairs, offering advice on kitchen equipment, simply being there when she needed someone to remind her that she was capable of this enormous leap of faith. "Morning, Nathan," she said, opening the door. He held 2 cups of coffee from the Moonlight Diner, and the gesture was so thoughtful, so perfectly timed, that she felt tears threaten for a moment. "Thought you might need some fuel," he said, his eyes taking in the bustling kitchen behind her. "This looks incredible, Sarah. Smells even better. We're actually ahead of schedule," she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I was so nervous about today, but now that we're in the thick of it, I remember why I loved this so much." Nathan smiled, and she noticed something different in his expression. Pride, yes, but also something warmer, more personal. "I knew you would. The question is, how are you feeling about the bigger picture? About staying?" It was a fair question. The grand opening was also Sarah's official trial period. If today went well, if the community embraced the culinary program, she would have job security and a new life path. If it didn't, scared, she admitted, excited, grateful, terrified. She laughed, realizing how contradictory that sounded. I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, but instead of wanting to jump off, I want to learn how to fly. That sounds like growth to me, Nathan said quietly. Before Sarah could respond, the kitchen doors swung open and Emma walked in, wearing a crisp blazer and carrying an overnight bag. Sarah's heart leaped. She'd known her daughter was flying in for the opening, but seeing her here, in this new space that represented such a monumental shift, made everything feel more real. "Mum," Emma crossed the kitchen in quick strides and pulled Sarah into a fierce hug. "This place is amazing. I can't believe you did all this in 6 weeks." "I had help," Sarah said, glancing meaningfully at Nathan, who was studying the ceiling with sudden fascination. Emma followed her gaze and extended a hand to Nathan. "You must be Nathan." "I'm Emma, Sarah's daughter. Thank you for everything you've done for my mom." Nathan shook her hand, looking slightly overwhelmed. "Your mom did all the hard work. I just opened a few doors." "He's being modest," Sarah said, feeling a need to set the record straight. "Nathan saved my life, quite literally, and then gave me the chance to rebuild it." The weight of that statement settled over the three of them, and Sarah realized she'd never spoken so directly about how close she'd come to ending everything. But instead of the awkwardness she'd expected, she felt a sense of relief. This was her truth, her story, and she was no longer ashamed of it. "Well," Emma said, her voice slightly husky with emotion, "then I owe you more than I can ever repay." "You don't owe me anything," Nathan said gently, "but if you want to help your mom today, there are serving stations that need to be set up." Over the next 2 hours, Sarah watched her carefully planned event come together with the kind of seamless coordination that only happened when every person involved was working toward the same goal. Emma proved to be a natural at organizing the front-of-house logistics. Nathan moved effortlessly between helping in the kitchen and handling last-minute setup issues throughout the center. Even Michael called from California, and Sarah put him on speaker so the whole team could hear his encouragement and jokes. At 11:30, 30 minutes before the official opening, Sarah found herself alone in the kitchen for the first time all morning. Everything was ready. The main courses were warming in the ovens, the cold salads were perfectly chilled, and the dessert display looked like something from a magazine. She had 15 minutes to change out of her work clothes and transform herself from head chef to program director. In her small apartment upstairs, Sarah looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Her face was flushed from the kitchen heat, her graying hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she looked more alive than she had in 2 years. The woman staring back at her wasn't the same person who'd stood on that bridge 6 weeks ago, ready to give up entirely. She thought about the kintsugi bowl Nathan had shown her, how the golden repairs had made it more beautiful than it had been when whole. Maybe that's what she was becoming, not the same woman she'd been before David died, but someone new, someone whose cracks had been filled with hard-won wisdom and compassion. A gentle knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Sarah, it's Nathan. Are you ready?" She opened the door to find him waiting in the hallway, wearing a crisp white shirt and dark jeans instead of his usual work clothes. He looked nervous, which was somehow endearing on such a large, usually confident man. "You clean up nice," she said, then immediately blushed at her own boldness. "So do you," he replied, his eyes taking in the simple blue dress she'd chosen. One David had always said brought out the color of her eyes. They walked downstairs together and Sarah could hear the buzz of conversation from the main hall. Through the service window she could see people beginning to fill the space, families with children, elderly couples, young professionals, teenagers. The community center was fulfilling its promise already, bringing together people who might never otherwise occupy the same space. "Sarah," Nathan said quietly as they reached the kitchen door, "before we go out there, I want you to know something. Regardless of how today goes, regardless of what happens with this job, you've already succeeded at the most important thing. What's that? You chose to live, you chose to rebuild. You chose to believe that your story wasn't over. His expression grew tender in a way that made her heart skip. That took more courage than most people have to give. Before Sarah could respond, Emma appeared beside them, practically vibrating with excitement. "Mum, you need to see this. The line for food is already forming, and people are asking questions about cooking classes and job training programs. I think this is going to be even bigger than anyone expected." Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the familiar pre-performance nerves she remembered from her bakery's busiest days. But underneath the nervousness was something else. Anticipation, excitement, the thrill of being about to share something she'd created with people who would appreciate it. "Ready?" Nathan asked. "Ready," she said, surprised by how much she meant it. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of serving food, explaining programs, and watching people discover what the community center could offer them. Sarah found herself in dozens of conversations, with single mothers interested in job training, with seniors wanting to learn new cooking techniques, with teenagers like Tommy who were hungry for mentorship and direction. But the moment that would stay with her forever came when she was refilling the salad station and overheard two elderly women talking near the dessert table. "This chocolate cake is incredible," one was saying. "Reminds me of the kind of thing Sarah Mitchell used to make at her bakery." "You remember Sweet Dreams?" "Of course I remember," the second woman replied. "Best wedding cakes in the county. Such a shame what happened after her husband died. I heard she lost everything." Sarah felt her chest tighten, preparing for the familiar wave of shame and failure that usually accompanied references to her old life. But then the first woman continued. "Well, wherever she ended up, I hope she's doing something with that talent of hers. The world needs more people who understand that food is about more than just eating. It's about bringing people together, making them feel cared for." Sarah stood frozen at the salad station, realizing that this woman, someone who remembered, who valued what she'd once created, had no idea she was standing 3 feet away, that the woman she hoped was doing something with her talent was right here, creating again, feeding people again, building something new from the ruins of what had been lost. She turned around and approached the two women with a smile. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing. I'm Sarah Mitchell, the new culinary director here at the center. And you're right, I did used to own Sweet Dreams." Both women's faces lit up with recognition and delight. "Sarah, my goodness, we thought you'd disappeared entirely. This food is wonderful, just as good as anything you used to make at the bakery." "Thank you," Sarah said, feeling tears prick her eyes for what felt like the 100th time that day. "It's good to be cooking for the community again." As the afternoon wound down and the last visitors filtered out of the center, Sarah found herself standing in the main hall with Nathan, Emma, and her kitchen team, surveying the beautiful chaos of a successful event. Dirty dishes were stacked on serving tables, crumbs dotted the floor, and the air still carried the lingering sense of the meal they'd prepared together. "So," Emma said, grinning at her mother, "I think it's safe to say you've found your calling again." Sarah looked around at the faces of the people who'd helped make today possible. Maria and James, who'd discovered they loved working in a professional kitchen. Tommy, who'd found a mentor and a direction. Nathan, who'd seen something in her when she couldn't see it in herself. Emma, who'd flown across the country to support her mother's new beginning. "I think," Sarah said slowly, "I found more than that. I think I found my family." It was Nathan who started the applause, slow and steady, quickly joined by the other. As Sarah listened to the sound echoing through the space that would become her new professional home, she thought about how different this day was from what she'd imagined 6 weeks ago when she'd stood on that bridge, convinced her story was over. The woman who had stood on that bridge had seen only endings, the end of her marriage, the end of her business, the end of her usefulness in the world. But the woman standing here now understood something that her grandmother would have appreciated. Sometimes what looks like an ending is actually just the world, making room for a beginning too beautiful to imagine. Outside, the sun was setting over Riverside, painting the sky in shades of gold that reminded Sarah of the lines running through Nathan's kintsugi bowl. broken places repaired with something precious, made more beautiful by the very fact of having survived the breaking. Tomorrow she would begin developing cooking classes for single parents, job training programs for the unemployed, and nutrition education for seniors. Tomorrow she would start building the kind of community resource she'd always dreamed of creating. But tonight she was simply a woman who had rediscovered that her story wasn't over. It was just beginning a new chapter, one that promised to be richer and more meaningful than anything she could have written before she learned what it meant to lose everything and find the courage to begin again. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Riverside Community Center kitchen as Sarah put the finishing touches on what would become the most important cake of her new life. It wasn't the largest cake she'd ever made, nor the most elaborate, but it carried more love and meaning than anything she'd created in her 25 years as a professional baker. Today was the community center's first anniversary celebration, and it was also the day Nathan had quietly asked if he could speak with her about something important after the festivities ended. There had been something different in his voice, something that made her heart flutter with the same nervous energy she'd felt as a teenager before her first dance. "Miss Sarah, the tables are all set up outside," Tommy called from the prep area. Now 18 and enrolled in culinary school with a scholarship the center had helped him secure, he still worked part-time in Sarah's kitchen. His transformation from a shy, directionless boy into a confident young man with dreams of opening his own restaurant someday never failed to move her. "Thank you, Tommy. How are James and Maria doing with the setup?" "Mr. James has the grilling station ready to go, and Mrs. Maria is directing the volunteers like a general." Tommy grinned. "She says everything will be perfect or she'll know the reason why." Sarah smiled, thinking about how her small kitchen team had grown into something resembling a family over the past year. James had discovered a passion for outdoor cooking and now ran weekend barbecue classes that were booked solid through the summer. Maria had become her assistant manager and was taking business courses at the community college, determined to one day open a catering company specializing in authentic Mexican cuisine. But it wasn't just her immediate team that had flourished. The culinary program now served over 300 people each month through job training, cooking classes, nutrition education, and community meals. Sarah had watched countless people discover not just cooking skills, but confidence, community, and hope for their futures. "Sarah?" Emma's voice came from the kitchen doorway, and Sarah turned to see her daughter approaching with a familiar look of barely contained excitement. Over the past year, Emma had become one of Sarah's most enthusiastic supporters, visiting monthly and even convincing her law firm to provide pro bono legal services for center participants, starting their own small businesses. "What's got you looking so pleased with yourself?" Sarah asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Michael just called. He's running a few minutes late, but he'll be here before the ceremony starts." "And Mom," Emma paused, her expression growing more serious. "He has news. Good news, but big news. He wanted to tell you in person." Before Sarah could ask for details, the kitchen doors swung open, and Nathan walked in, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers that looked like they'd been picked from the meadow behind the center rather than purchased from a florist. The gesture was so perfectly him, thoughtful, natural, unpretentious, that Sarah felt her chest tighten with emotion. "For the lady of the hour," he said, presenting the flowers with a slight bow that made Emma giggle and Sarah blush like a schoolgirl. "Thank you," Sarah said, accepting the bouquet and breathing in the sweet scent of summer blooms. "They're beautiful, not as beautiful as what you've built here," Nathan replied, his eyes taking in the bustling kitchen around them. "I still remember that first morning when you stood in this empty space, trying to imagine how it could work. Look at it now." Sarah followed his gaze, seeing the kitchen through his eyes. Every station was occupied by volunteers preparing food for the celebration. Laughter and conversation filled the air. The walls were covered with photos from cooking classes, thank you notes from program participants, and certificates of achievement earned by people who'd found new directions for their lives within these walls. "It's not what I built," Sarah said quietly. "It's what we built. All of us together." Emma cleared her throat meaningfully. "I'm going to go check on the sound system setup." Nathan, make sure Mom takes a break before the festivities start. She's been in this kitchen since 5 this morning. After Emma left, Nathan moved closer to Sarah, his expression growing tender in the way that still made her pulse quicken after all these months. Their relationship had developed slowly, carefully, both of them carrying the scars of profound loss, and reluctant to rush into anything that might threaten the friendship that had quite literally saved her life. But over the past year, friendship had deepened into something neither of them had expected to find again. Love, not the passionate, all-consuming love of youth, but something deeper, quieter, built on mutual respect, shared values, and the recognition that they had both been broken and healed in ways that made them perfect complements to each other. "How are you feeling about today?" Nathan asked, reaching out to gently adjust a strand of hair that had escaped from her ponytail. "Grateful," Sarah said without hesitation. "Amazed. A little overwhelmed by how much has changed since that night on the bridge. Any regrets?" Sarah considered the question seriously. A year ago, she might have said she regretted the pain, the losses that had brought her to that breaking point. But now, understanding how that breaking had led to this rebuilding, she found herself shaking her head. "No regrets," she said firmly. "If David's death and losing the bakery hadn't happened, I would never have met you. I would never have discovered this work, never have helped Tommy or James or Maria find their path. I would never have learned that I was capable of starting over, of building something even better than what I'd lost." Nathan's smile was radiant. "My grandmother would have loved hearing you say that. She always believed that our greatest gifts often come disguised as our deepest challenges. I wish I could have met her. You would have adored each other," Nathan said with certainty. "She would have said you had the hands of a healer and the heart of a warrior." Before Sarah could respond, a commotion from the main hall caught their attention. Through the service window, they could see people beginning to gather for the celebration. City officials, community members, families who'd benefited from center programs, volunteers and supporters, were filling the space with the kind of joyful energy that made all the hard work worthwhile. "I should get out there," Sarah said, but found herself reluctant to leave the quiet intimacy of the kitchen. "In a minute," Nathan said, his voice taking on that different quality she'd noticed that morning. "First, I want to give you something." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, carved with intricate designs that looked unmistakably Native American. Sarah's breath caught as she recognized the craftsmanship. "Did you make this?" "My grandmother taught me woodworking when I was young. Said every man should know how to create something beautiful with his hands." Nathan's voice was slightly unsteady. "I've been working on this for 3 months, trying to get it right." Sarah opened the box with trembling fingers and gasped. Inside, nestled in soft leather, was the most unusual ring she'd ever seen. It wasn't a traditional diamond engagement ring, but something far more meaningful. The band was silver, inlaid with turquoise, and instead of a single stone, it featured a small piece of gold-veined pottery, kintsugi work, she realized, transformed into jewelry. "Nathan," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheek. "The pottery piece came from a bowl my grandmother made when I was a child," Nathan explained, his own voice thick with emotion. "It broke when I was packing up her things, after she died. I saved the pieces, thinking maybe someday I'd try to repair it. When I met you, when I understood what you meant about being broken, I knew what those pieces were really meant for." Sarah looked up at him through her tears, seeing the vulnerability and hope in his expression. The way he was offering her, not just his love, but his entire history, his deepest beliefs about healing and resilience, and the beauty that could emerge from brokenness. "Sarah Mitchell," Nathan said, his voice growing stronger, "you taught me that love doesn't end with loss. It transforms into something new. You showed me that two people who've been broken can create something together that's stronger and more beautiful than either of them could build alone. Will you marry me?" The kitchen around them had grown quiet, and Sarah realized that their entire team, Tommy, James, Maria, even Emma, who must have been listening from the doorway, were holding their breath, waiting for her answer. But Sarah had no doubts. No hesitation. This man had literally saved her life, and then helped her rebuild it into something more meaningful than she'd ever dreamed possible. He understood her grief because he'd carried his own. He knew her strengths because he'd watched her discover them. He loved not just who she was now, but who she was becoming. "Yes," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the kitchen. "Yes, of course. Yes." The eruption of cheers and applause from her kitchen family was quickly joined by sounds from the main hall, as word of the proposal spread through the celebration like wildfire. What Sarah was aware of, none of it. Her entire world had narrowed to Nathan's hands as he slipped the ring onto her finger, to the perfect fit of the band that carried pieces of his grandmother's broken bowl, transformed into a symbol of their shared commitment to healing. "It's perfect," she whispered, studying the way the gold veins caught the light. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "Not nearly as beautiful as you," Nathan replied, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that tasted like promise and hope, and the kind of love that emerges not in spite of suffering, but because of the wisdom suffering can teach. When they finally broke apart, they found themselves surrounded by their extended family, not just Emma and the kitchen team, but Michael, who must have arrived during the proposal and was grinning like a man who'd won the lottery. "Mike," Sarah reached for her son, who swept her into a bear hug that lifted her off her feet. "Congratulations, Mom. I couldn't be happier for you." Michael turned to Nathan, extending his hand. "Welcome to the family. Fair warning. She's going to try to feed you until you can't move, and she'll worry about you constantly. But she'll also love you more fiercely than you knew was possible. I'm counting on it," Nathan replied, shaking Michael's hand with a grip that spoke of mutual respect and understanding. "Now," Emma said, clapping her hands together, "we have a celebration to get to, and Mom needs to cut the anniversary cake. But first, Michael, didn't you have some news to share?" Michael's grin widened. "I've been offered a position at the San Francisco office of my company, managing their new sustainable development division. The pay is great, the work is exactly what I've been hoping for. And," he paused for dramatic effect, "it's a remote position. I can work from anywhere with a good internet connection." Sarah felt her heart leap. "You mean?" I mean, I'm moving back to Riverside, Mom. I want to be close to family again. I want to be part of whatever you're building here." Michael's expression grew more serious. "Losing Dad, watching you go through everything you went through, it made me realize that success doesn't mean anything if you're not sharing it with the people you love." The tears Sarah had been fighting all morning finally overwhelmed her defenses. She found herself sobbing, not with grief this time, but with overwhelming gratitude for the richness of the life that had emerged from the ashes of her deepest despair. 2 hours later, as the anniversary celebration reached its peak, Sarah stood at the edge of the crowd watching the scene unfold before her. Children ran between tables while their parents sampled food from the various stations her team had prepared. Seniors chatted with teenagers in the kind of intergenerational mixing that had become a hallmark of center events. Program graduates shared their success stories with newcomers who were just beginning their own journeys toward stability and hope. At the center of it all, Nathan was deep in conversation with a group of young fathers about a new parenting support program he was developing. Even from a distance, Sarah could see how the men looked up to him, literally given his height, but also figuratively drawn to his combination of strength and gentleness that made him a natural mentor. "Quite a view, isn't it?" Emma said, appearing at Sarah's elbow with 2 glasses of lemonade. "It's everything I never knew I wanted," Sarah replied, accepting the drink gratefully. "A year ago I thought my life was over. Now look at all this. I have a confession to make," Emma said, her tone growing more serious. "That night you called to tell me about the job offer. I was so scared it was too good to be true, that you were going to get your hopes up only to have them crushed again. I almost told you not to take the risk. What changed your mind?" "Your voice," Emma said simply. "For the first time since Dad died, you sounded like yourself again. Not the person you were trying to be, not the person you thought you should be, but the mom I remembered from childhood. the one who believed anything was possible if you worked hard enough and cared enough about other people. Sarah felt fresh tears threatening. I'm sorry it took me so long to find my way back to that person. Mom, you didn't find your way back, Emma said firmly. You found your way forward. The woman standing here today isn't the same person who ran Sweet Dreams Bakery. She's someone new, someone who's been tested and broken and rebuilt herself into something stronger. Before Sarah could respond, the sound system crackled to life, and Nathan's voice filled the space. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment. The crowd quieted, turning toward the small stage that had been set up for the afternoon's presentations. Nathan stood behind the microphone, looking slightly uncomfortable with the public attention, but determined to push through. A year ago, this building was just empty space with potential, he began. Today, it's the heart of our community, and that transformation happened because of one person's vision and courage. Sarah Mitchell didn't just create a culinary program. She created a place where people could rediscover their own potential, where food became a bridge to healing and hope. The crowd began to applaud, but Nathan held up a hand for silence. But more than that, he continued, his eyes finding Sarah in the crowd, she taught all of us that it's never too late to start over, never too late to find new purpose, never too late to build something beautiful from the pieces of what came before. Today, this amazing woman agreed to marry me, and I couldn't be more grateful to spend the rest of my life learning from her example. The applause this time was thunderous, accompanied by cheers and whistles that made Sarah's cheeks burn with embarrassment and joy. As Nathan made his way through the crowd toward her, she was struck by the perfect symmetry of the moment. A year ago, she had stood on a bridge ready to end her story, and today she stood surrounded by community, family, and love, ready to begin the most important chapter yet. That evening, after the last volunteer had gone home and the kitchen had been cleaned and organized for the next day's programs, Sarah and Nathan sat on the small balcony outside her apartment, watching the stars emerge over rivers. The kintsugi engagement ring caught the moonlight, its gold veins tracing patterns of repair and resilience across her finger. Do you think your grandmother would have approved? Sarah asked, settling into the circle of Nathan's arms. She would have adored you, Nathan said with certainty. She always said that the most beautiful people are the ones who've been broken and put themselves back together. She would have said you have the soul of a survivor and the heart of a healer. Sarah thought about Elena Crow Feather, the tiny woman who'd raised a gentle giant and filled him with wisdom about resilience and repair. I wish she could see what we've built together. Who says she can't? Nathan replied softly. Apache tradition teaches that our ancestors are never really gone. They live on in the love we carry forward, in the wisdom we share, in the lives we touch. Every person you've helped in that kitchen, every family you've brought together around a table, every moment of healing you've facilitated, that's her legacy continuing through you. As if summoned by their conversation, a gentle breeze stirred the air around them, carrying the scent of the herbs Sarah had planted in the rooftop garden, sage and rosemary, and thyme, growing strong in soil that had once seemed barren. I love you, Nathan Crow Feather, Sarah said, the words feeling both brand new and ancient, as if they'd been waiting inside her heart for exactly this moment, exactly this man. I love you too, Sarah Mitchell, he replied, his voice carrying the weight of promise and the lightness of joy. My grandmother used to say that some souls are meant to find each other, no matter how broken they become along the way. She said those souls recognize each other, not despite their scars, but because of them. Sarah turned in his arms to face him, seeing in his eyes the reflection of her own journey from despair to hope, from ending to beginning, from broken to beautifully repaired. Then we were always meant to find each other. She said. Always, Nathan agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted like forever. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, and somewhere in the distance, the river that had once seemed like an ending continued its eternal flow, carrying away what could no longer be held, and bringing new possibilities downstream to those brave enough to reach for them. In her kitchen below, Tomorrow's bread was rising in the warmth of banked ovens, and in her heart, Sarah felt the same patient, powerful transformation, the alchemy of healing that turns the darkest hours into the raw material for the most luminous dawn. The woman who had cried, "My future is broken," had discovered the path to resilience, and in walking that path, she had found not just survival, but a love and purpose more beautiful than anything she could have imagined when she was whole. Some stories end with happily ever after, but the best stories, the ones that change lives and heal hearts, end with, "and so the real journey begins."